England, 1847. Victorian era. The whispers had followed Lady Celestine Armitage for so long. She had learned to move through drawing rooms as though wrapped in silence. At 43, she had become a fixture at society gatherings, neither welcomed nor excluded, simply present, like the portraits on the walls or the marble columns holding up the ceiling. "Poor creature," murmured Lady Thornbury behind her peacock fan, her voice carrying just enough to be heard. Still attending the season at her age. One would think family loyalty has limits. Celestine's fingers tightened imperceptibly on her wine glass. The deep burgundy gown she wore, a color deemed appropriate for women of her years, suddenly felt like a uniform of defeat. She had chosen it carefully that morning, as she chose everything now, with resignation rather than hope. She was the eldest daughter of the late Viscount Armitage, a family of modest standing whose name carried more history than fortune. Her younger sisters had married well, Caroline to a baron, Sophia to a prosperous merchant, while Celestine remained the spinster aunt. The cautionary tale mothers whispered to daughters who dared to be too particular in their youth. But it wasn't particularity that had kept Celestine unwed. It was the curse. At least, that's what they called it. The tragedy that had struck when she was 21, on the very eve of her engagement to Lord Hartfield's second son. The carriage accident that had claimed his life and left questions no one dared ask aloud. Questions about why she had been the only survivor. Questions about the argument witnesses claimed to have heard before the horses bolted. The engagement had died with him, and with it, Celestine's prospects. Within a season, the whispers had begun. Unlucky, dangerous, cursed. 22 years had passed since that night, yet the shadow remained. "Miss Thornbury looks radiant this evening," came a voice at her elbow, her nephew, Thomas, the current Viscount, trying to draw her into conversation. "Do you not think so, Aunt Celestine?" "She does indeed," Celestine replied with practiced grace, offering him a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "You should ask her to dance, Thomas. Don't waste your evening keeping an old spinster company. You're not." He began, but she gently cut him off with a look that said she'd heard all the kind protests before and they changed nothing. That's when the ballroom doors opened. The effect was immediate. Conversations faltered. Fans paused mid-flutter. Every head turned toward the entrance where Lord Cashin Merwood, the Earl of Thorndale, stood surveying the assembly with an expression of cool assessment that bordered on boredom. He was impossibly handsome in the way that made him dangerous. Tall, broad-shouldered, with dark hair swept back from a face that sculptors would weep to capture. At 36, he remained London's most coveted bachelor, a man whose wealth was exceeded only by his reputation for being utterly unobtainable. 3 seasons. 3 perfect matches rejected without explanation. Mothers had given up hope, and daughters had moved on to more attainable prospects. "Merwood," breathed Thomas beside her. "I didn't know he was back in London." His gaze swept across the room and stopped. On her, Celestine froze. There was no mistaking the direction of his stare. Those storm-gray eyes locked onto hers with an intensity that made her breath catch. For a heartbeat, the crowded ballroom seemed to fade away, leaving only that penetrating look that felt like it could see straight through to her guarded heart. Then, impossibly, he started walking toward her. "Good God," Thomas whispered. "Is he?" "Aunt Celestine, I think he's—" But Celestine couldn't hear the rest. Her pulse thundered in her ears as Lord Cashin Merwood crossed the ballroom floor with purposeful strides, his eyes never leaving her face. Around them, the whispers erupted like wildfire. He stopped directly before her, so close she could see the gold flecks in his gray eyes, and bowed with a precision that spoke of breeding and power. "Forgive my forwardness," he said, his voice deep and measured, carrying an authority that silenced the nearby gossip instantly. "But I find myself compelled to make your acquaintance. I am Cashin Merwood, Earl of Thorndale." Celestine's throat went dry. Every instinct screamed at her to curtsy and retreat, to not give society another reason to dissect her. But something in his gaze, something that looked almost like recognition, though they had never met, held her frozen. "Lady Celestine Armitage, my lord," she managed, her voice steadier than she felt. "Lady Celestine." He repeated her name as though testing how it sounded, and seemed satisfied. "Would you do me the honor of this dance?" The question landed like a stone in still water, sending ripples of shock through everyone within earshot. Lady Thornberry's fan actually clattered to the floor. Thomas made a sound somewhere between a cough and a gasp. Celestine stared at him, searching for mockery, for the cruel jest that must be hiding behind this impossible request. But his expression remained perfectly serious, one gloved hand extended toward her, waiting. "My lord," she said carefully, "surely you've mistaken me for someone else. I am neither young nor—" "I have mistaken nothing, Lady Celestine," he interrupted, though not unkindly. "The waltz is beginning. Will you dance with me or not?" It was madness. In 22 years, no gentleman had asked her to dance. Not once. Not even out of pity. And now the Earl of Thorndale, the man every mother in London had thrown at their daughters, stood before her, waiting. Every reasonable thought told her to decline, to spare them both the scandal. But when she looked into his eyes, she saw something that made her decision for her, genuine interest. Not pity, not cruelty, just curiosity, as though she were a puzzle he'd only just noticed and couldn't wait to solve. "I would be honored, my lord," she heard herself say. His smile was slight, but real. "The honor is mine." As his hand closed around hers, and he led her onto the dance floor, Celestine felt the weight of 100 scandalized stares boring into her back. She heard the whispers, shocked, cruel, confused, but for the first time in 22 years, she didn't care. Because Lord Cashin Merwood, the most eligible earl in England, was looking at her as though she were the only woman in the room. And Celestine Armitage, cursed and forgotten at 43, felt something she thought had died long ago stirring back to life in her chest. Hope. Dangerous, foolish, terrifying hope. What Celestine didn't know, couldn't know, was that Lord Cashin Merwood had come to this ball specifically to find her. That he'd spent weeks researching her family, her past, the tragedy that had shaped her life. And that hidden in her forgotten history was a secret powerful enough to destroy everything he'd built. But that revelation would come later. Tonight, as the waltz began and his hand settled at her waist with unexpected tenderness, all that mattered was this. For the first time in decades, Lady Celestine Armitage was being seen. And the man seeing her had no intention of looking away. The morning after the ball, Cashin sat in his study at Merwood House, a tumbler of whiskey untouched before him despite the early hour. Across from him, his closest friend and advisor, Lord Edmund Ashford, watched with undisguised concern. "Celestine Armitage," Edmund said slowly, as though testing dangerous waters. "Of all the women in London, Cashin, why her?" Cashin's jaw tightened. "You disapprove. I'm trying to understand. She's 20 years past her debut. No fortune. No connections of consequence. And that business with Hartfield's son." Edmund stopped at the warning flash in Cashin's eyes. "I'm merely saying what everyone else is thinking. Then everyone else is blind." Cashin rose, moving to the window overlooking Grosvenor Square. "When I saw her last night, standing there with that careful dignity, as though she'd learned to make herself invisible. Edmund, I've never met anyone more visible to me." What he didn't say, couldn't say, not yet, was that he'd known her name before last night. Had known it for months. The private investigator's report sat locked in his desk drawer, pages documenting not scandal but tragedy, not guilt but survival. Lady Celestine Armitage wasn't cursed. She was a woman who had witnessed something she shouldn't have, on a night that had nearly killed her too. And the men who had killed young Hartfield were still out there. Watching. Waiting. Edmund sighed. The Duke of Ravenswood was asking about her this morning at the club. Seemed unusually interested in your sudden fascination. Cashin's blood ran cold. Ravenswood. Of course. What did you tell him? Nothing. But Cashin, if he's noticed. Let him notice. Cashin's voice hardened with resolve. I'm calling on Lady Celestine this afternoon. And I'm doing it publicly. The Ashworth Gallery exhibition was the season's most anticipated event, drawing every notable family in London. Celestine had come reluctantly, knowing her presence would fuel more gossip after the previous night's inexplicable dance. She stood before a Turner seascape, trying to lose herself in the riot of color and light, when the crowd behind her went suddenly, unnaturally quiet. Lady Celestine. She knew his voice now, had heard it in her dreams during the few hours she'd managed to sleep. Turning, she found Lord Cashin Merwood standing close enough that she could see the determined set of his jaw, the way his eyes softened when they met hers. My lord, she managed, acutely aware of the dozens of pairs of eyes fixed upon them. "I was hoping to find you here." He offered his arm with easy confidence. "Would you walk with me? I'm told the new exhibition hall is particularly impressive." It was a request that sounded like a statement, delivered loudly enough for everyone nearby to hear. Celestine felt panic flutter in her chest. One dance could be dismissed as eccentricity. This, continuing his attention in broad daylight at society's most visible gathering, this was deliberate. "Lord Mayor would, I hardly think." "Please." The single word, spoken softly but with such genuine appeal, stopped her protest. "I find I am utterly uninterested in viewing art alone today." She should refuse. Should save them both from the scandal that was already erupting around them in whispered explosions. But his gray eyes held something that looked almost like need, as though her acceptance mattered in ways that transcended social convention. "Very well," she heard herself whisper. As she placed her gloved hand on his arm, the silence in the gallery shattered into furious whispers. And across the room, standing beside a Rembrandt portrait, the Duke of Ravenswood watched them with eyes cold as winter stone. The note arrived 3 days later, slipped under Celestine's bedroom door while the household slept. No signature, no seal, just 5 words in an angular, unfamiliar hand that made her blood turn to ice. "I know what you did." Celestine's hands trembled as she clutched the paper, her mind racing back 22 years to that terrible night. The carriage lurching. Young Hartfield's face, pale with fear, as he'd tried to shield her from the masked men who'd stopped them on the dark road. The terrible struggle, the shot that had echoed through the darkness, and the words she'd heard before fleeing into the woods, wounded and terrified. "Make it look like an accident. The girl will keep quiet if she knows what's good for her." She had kept quiet. For 22 years, she'd carried the truth locked inside her heart. That Lord Hartfield's son hadn't died in a simple carriage accident, but had been murdered by men whose faces she'd never fully seen. Men whose voices still haunted her nightmares. She'd been too frightened to speak then, a girl of 21 against powerful forces she didn't understand. And as the years passed, as the world labeled her cursed rather than endangered, silence had become her shield. But now someone knew, or suspected. And with Lord Cashin's very public courtship drawing attention to her after decades of obscurity, that someone had decided to remind her that some secrets refused to stay buried. The paper crumpled in her shaking fingers. She had to end this, whatever was developing between her and the Earl, before his interest in her awakened something far more dangerous than scandal, before the past she'd survived once came back to kill them both. Cashin found her in the Kensington Gardens the next afternoon, walking alone despite the impropriety of it. He'd received her note, formal, distant, requesting he cease his attentions, and had promptly ignored it. "You're avoiding me," he said without preamble, falling into step beside her. "I'm being sensible," Celestine replied, not looking at him. "Your interest in me is causing talk that will damage you, my lord. I'm doing you a kindness. Don't." The word came out sharper than he'd intended. "Don't make decisions for me, Celestine. And don't pretend this is about my reputation." She stopped walking, finally meeting his eyes. "Then what would you have me say? That I'm terrified? That every instinct tells me your attention will end in disaster for us both? That I'm 43 years old and cursed, and have no business entertaining the notice of a man like you?" "You're not cursed," Cashin said fiercely, stepping closer. "And I don't give a damn about your age, or what society whispers. Do you want to know why I approached you that night, Celestine? Because when I saw you standing there, carrying your loneliness like armor, I recognized something I've felt my entire life. I saw you, and I have never wanted anyone the way I want you." The raw honesty in his voice nearly broke her resolve. "You don't know me. You don't know what You witnessed Hartfield's murder." The words fell between them like stones. "I know, Celestine. I've known for months." The world tilted. She swayed, and his hands caught her elbows, steadying her. "How?" she whispered. "Because I've been investigating his death." Cashin's voice gentled. "And because the men who killed him are the same ones threatening everything I'm trying to build. Your silence protected you. But Celestine, it also left them free to continue destroying lives, including, potentially, ours." Tears she hadn't shed in 22 years burned behind her eyes. "Then you understand why you must stay away from me. If they think I've spoken, then we face them together." His hands tightened on her arms. "I'm not afraid of them, Celestine. But I am terrified of losing you before I've even had the chance to know you. Let me protect you. Let me—" He stopped, seeming to struggle with the words. "Let me love you, if you'll have me." She stared at him, this impossible man who had stormed into her quiet resignation and offered her everything she'd thought forever lost. Danger, hope, a future that terrified and thrilled her in equal measure. "This is madness," she whispered. "Yes," he agreed. "But it's our madness. Say yes, Celestine." And standing there in the fading afternoon light, with the weight of 22 years of silence pressing down on her heart, Lady Celestine Armitage made the most reckless decision of her carefully guarded life. Yes, dear reader, we've only just begun Celestine and Cashin's journey, and I need your help to continue bringing you these stories of love, redemption, and second chances. I'm reaching for 5,000 subscribers, and I cannot do it without you. If this story has touched you, if you felt Celestine's pain or thrilled at Cashin's devotion, please, take just 10 seconds right now to hit that subscribe button. Share this with someone who needs to hear that it's never too late for love. Your support isn't just a number. It's validation that these stories deserve to be told. It's encouragement that keeps me writing through late nights. It's the difference between creating occasionally and building something truly special for all of us who believe in love without age limits. Don't wait. Subscribe now. Like this video. Comment with your thoughts. Share it with your book club, your sister, your friend who needs hope. Together, let's build a community that celebrates every woman's worth at every age. Thank you for being here. Thank you for caring. Now please, show that care with your support. Hit subscribe. We're building something beautiful together. The Duke of Ravenswood's study reeked of cigar smoke and old money. He set down the investigator's report with deliberate precision, a cold smile spreading across his weathered face. So the Armitage woman witnessed it all, he murmured to himself. How remarkably inconvenient. 22 years ago, Ravenswood had ordered young Hartfield's death. The fool had discovered the Duke's involvement in a smuggling operation that would have ruined him. The carriage accident had been perfect, clean, until now. Mayor Wood's sudden interest in the woman was no coincidence. The Earl had been quietly investigating the smuggling ring for months, getting dangerously close to connections that led straight to Ravenswood's door. If Celestine spoke, if she confirmed what Mayor Wood suspected, everything would unravel. He penned a note in his elegant script, each word a calculated blade. Lady Celestine, your continued association with Lord Marewood forces my hand. End the courtship publicly within 3 days, or I shall reveal not only what you witnessed that night, but evidence suggesting you were complicit in young Hartfield's death. A woman scorned makes a compelling murderess, don't you think? Choose wisely. You have survived this long by staying silent and invisible. I suggest you return to that state, a friend to your continued health. He sealed it with black wax and summoned his footman. Deliver this to Harrington House. Discreetly, Ravenswood poured himself brandy and raised the glass in mock salute. Marewood thought himself clever, but he'd made a fatal error. He'd fallen in love. And love, the Duke knew, always made men weak. 3 days. The woman would comply, or he would destroy her. Either way, Marewood's investigation would die with his broken heart. The note from Ravenswood arrived at dawn, its implications clear as death. Celestine read it 3 times, each word cementing her resolve. She couldn't let Cashin sacrifice himself for her. Not when Ravenswood held the power to twist her survival into guilt, her silence into complicity. By afternoon, she'd packed a single trunk. Her lady's maid, sworn to secrecy, had secured passage on a coach to Scotland. Celestine would disappear into the countryside, become a governess under an assumed name. Live quietly, survive, as she'd always done. She was penning her farewell letter to Cashin, formal, distant, necessary, when her door crashed open. He stood there, wild-eyed and breathless, still in his riding clothes. You're leaving. Cashin, you shouldn't be here. It's improper. Damn propriety. He strode forward, snatching the letter from her hands. His eyes scanned the words, and something in his expression shattered. No, absolutely not. You don't get to make this decision alone. He'll destroy us both, Celestine whispered, tears finally breaking free. Ravenswood has evidence, forged, I'm sure, but convincing. That makes me look guilty of murder. He'll ruin you for associating with me. Your investigation, your reputation, Everything you've worked for. Do you think I care? Cashin gripped her shoulders. Do you think any of that matters more than you? It should. The words tore from her throat. I'm 43 and cursed and ruined, and you're yours, he interrupted fiercely. I am yours, Celestine. And if Ravenswood wants a war, he'll have one. But he won't have you. Not without going through me first. She collapsed against him, 22 years of fear finally finding voice. I'm so tired of running, Cashin. So tired of being afraid. Then stop, he whispered into her hair. Stop running. Stand with me. Let me fight for you. Cashin called for a public assembly at the Belmont Grand Hall 3 days later. A gathering of peers, press, and society's elite. Celestine stood beside him on the raised platform, her hand trembling in his. Ravenswood sat in the front row, confident and smiling. He thought he'd already won. My lords, ladies, and gentlemen, Cashin began, his voice carrying through the silent hall. I've gathered you here to speak truth about a grave injustice that has persisted for 22 years. He detailed it all, the smuggling ring, Hartfield's murder, the conspiracy of silence. When he revealed Ravenswood's involvement, gasps erupted. The Duke's face went purple with rage. Lies, Ravenswood roared, rising. And who is your witness to these fantasies? A spinster desperate for attention? The witness, Cashin said coldly, is a woman of extraordinary courage who has lived in fear because powerful men threatened her life. He turned to Celestine, squeezing her hand. Tell them. Celestine's voice shook at first, then grew stronger. She described that terrible night. The masked men, the murder, her desperate flight, the decades of silence bought by terror. I was 21 and alone and so very afraid. But I'm not alone anymore. The hall erupted. Ravenswood lunged forward, but officers Cashin had stationed seized him. You've destroyed yourself, Mayor Wood, the Duke spat. For a ruined woman past her prime. For the woman I love, Cashin corrected. Then, before the entire assembly, he turned to Celestine and dropped to one knee. Marry me. Not despite who you are, but because of it. Because you're the bravest person I've ever known. Through her tears, Celestine whispered, yes. The scandal would rage for months. But in that moment, she was finally free. 18 months later, Celestine stood in the nursery at Marewood Manor, cradling her newborn son. 10 months of marriage had brought her more joy than 43 years of survival, and now this impossible, precious life in her arms. Cashin entered quietly, his face transforming as he beheld his family. How is young Thomas? Perfect, Celestine whispered, still marveling. Absolutely perfect. He wrapped his arms around them both, pressing a kiss to her temple. Society said you were too old for love. For marriage. For this. Society, Celestine murmured, gazing at her son's sleeping face, was wrong about everything that matters. Outside, the world had slowly adjusted. Ravenswood was imprisoned, his co-conspirators exposed. The scandal had faded into fascination, then grudging acceptance. The Earl and his unexpected Countess had become a love story that society couldn't quite dismiss. At 44, Celestine had discovered something remarkable. Life didn't end when youth faded. Sometimes it finally began. I love you, Cashin whispered against her hair. My brave, beautiful wife. And I love you, she replied, leaning into his strength. My stubborn, impossible husband. Together, they stood in the golden afternoon light, a family forged from scandal and courage. Not cursed, never cursed. Simply, finally, blessedly chosen. What did you think of Celestine and Cashin's journey? Please rate this story out of 10 in the comments below. Your rating helps us understand what resonates with you and guides the stories we create. If their love story touched your heart, don't forget to subscribe for our next tale of unexpected romance and second chances. Coming soon, a story of a widowed duchess and the mysterious stranger who knows her darkest secret. Thank you so much for spending this time with us. Your support means everything. Until next time, remember, it's never too late for love. Thank you.